Hi, this is Rob again, and I'm at the workbench today because I said to myself, I really need two DC engines to show some of the DC versus DCC comparison that I'm doing in another video. I only have one DC engine right now. So I said to myself, could I take an engine that I've converted to DCC and convert it back to DC? So that's our adventure for today. So what I've done is I'm going to adjust the camera and look at the engine I have in front of me. So what we've got in front of us is an old DC engine that had been converted to DCC, and I've already unplugged the decoder. I've left the decoder in the shell of the engine, and I've already clipped the yellow and blue and white wire. So these three wires are connected to the lighting that's in the shell. Now, I left the decoder here because the sound end is also attached into the shell, and I don't need any of that. I'm going to do my later video just having basically this as the engine, but that's okay. So the fun part is I need to tin some wires because we're going to just put jumpers in here. So let me show you how I tin the wires because, well, I've done a lot of soldering and there are some points I want to share with you. So let's do that, and then I'll come back and continue with the engine. I'm going to tin these two wires for this little project I'm working on. And a lot of people have vices, clamps, things like that to hold their soldering irons. That's really cool. I'm more of a low-tech guy when I can get away with it. So I've got a stand for my soldering iron. I just leave it there. And then lay the wire on and then apply some solder. Now, I started soldering when I was a kid. I was a Heathkit kid, built Heathkit computers. Thanks, Dad. That was a great investment. And they had all sorts of soldering tutorials. And their big thing that some people miss these days is step one is to heat the material you're going to solder before you apply the solder. A lot of people will just put a gob of solder on the soldering iron and start punching that around. That doesn't really get the solder into all the fine wires like we want. So I heat up the wire, let the wire get hot, then add the solder, and as you notice, the solder just melts right in. So I'm going to tin this one again, hot wire, and see how the insulation's starting to burn. It only burns back a little bit, but that's a good indication that the wire is ready to accept its solder. And I do get some solder dropping towards the bottom, no big deal. And what I actually do is just tap the soldering iron and off it falls. But this is how I tin my wires so that I now have wires, and I know this is hard to see, but now these braided lines act like a solid wire, and because it's tinned, when I come back later and solder to it, it's already got some solder. On to the next step. Okay, so that's how I've tinned my wires, and what I want to share with you is here are the two wires that you saw me tin. If we look at this plug and we look at the schematic of that plug, which is in the documentation that comes with it, the very last page, we can see that the gray wire goes to the motor. The black wire is a pickup from the wheels. So when we do our tracing on this plug, and I'll get my little pointer here for us, the black wire is in the second position from this end of the plug. The gray wire is in the third position. So if we can jumper the second and third positions, and these are little bitty wires. Now I caution you, if you're going to do this with smaller wires. The problem with smaller wires is it's harder for them to make contact. But if you do it with wires that are too big, you're going to ruin this plug and it won't plug back into the decoder. This is just a temporary solution for me to do my video. The other thing is you connect the red to the other pickup of the track and the orange to the other side of the motor. So the fun part there is we just jumper these two, which also happen to be the second and the third wires from the other end of the plug. Now how's that for some fine detailed work when it stays in there? So once we get it in there, it'll stay. Now the fun part is it's really easy to test to see if these jumpers are doing their job, because when you drop it down on the DCC track, if the motor sings, you know you did your job. If not, then these aren't making contact. Originally I thought about just using wire wrap wire, because I had some, I've done wire wrapping before, but those were too small. And so these wires are actually, if you recognize them, wires clipped off of another plug for the DCC decoder. I also brought down and bought a 5-pack of these plugs that I can replace like this, because this engine looks pretty rat nested, doesn't it? This is one of the first engines I converted to DCC. So I'm eventually going to take all of this out and rewire it so that it looks nicer and is more manageable. But for now, this gives me my goal of converting a DCC converted engine back to DC. That's all it takes. So that's the fun part. That's all I wanted to show you in this video. Quick discussion, and then I'm going to go put this on the track, and you'll see this in my next video about DC versus DCC and why they matter and how you can take advantage of DCC. Again, that's all I had for today. Thanks, and I'll talk to you again soon.